Third, application of blockchain. And the second lesson, I talked about are general ideas and objectives of the blockchain. Before we go into concrete talks in this lesson, I would like to talk about for what fields the blockchain is actually useful and has applicability. Again, the big feature of the blockchain is that, despite the absence of a central administrator, each node does P2P communication and succeeds in representing the value on the network. In other words, when you introduce a blockchain to some sort of system, there is no mediator, so the fee paid by the user is very cheap or free. Then, I think that it is easy for you to understand by remembering existing systems such as vending machine. When transferring some value such as ownership of drink shifting, if there is no one to monitor on the spot as the central administrator, there is a possibility that fraud will occur. For example, a fraud that a vending machine is broken and drinks are stolen. In other words, without a mediator, the user doesn't have to pay the fee. On the other hand, it costs someone to avoid fraud. Therefore, I will explain later in the blockchain not only introducing a consensus algorithm called proof of work, in which cheating is not good plan, but also by all nodes participating in the blockchain monitoring transactions. Blockchain can be the system that fraud is not committed, even in the environment of P2P without central administrator. That is to say, once again, the absence of a mediator means that the user doesn't have to pay the fee or it's very cheap. However, the absence of mediator means that there's a possibility that illegal transaction may be done. Therefore, in the blockchain, a system to eliminate fraud by all nodes monitoring transaction is introduced and a reliable environment is constructed. So, even if the central administrator is absent, the user can trade without paying the fee with confidence about it. Let's see what kinds of fields are available to make use of the characteristics of the blockchain. Since it is possible to distribute value on a blockchain, first of all, you will think of money. It's exactly the cryptocurrency represented by Bitcoin. Also, there are credits and real estate in what you can imagine as value like money. Here, I will talk about real estate as an example. In general, many experts are involved in buying and selling real estate, and it is necessary to go through several processes. So, it takes time to make transactions in many cases. Therefore, you can automate transactions by doing real estate transactions with blockchain. That introduces a mechanism called smart contracts that can make transactions automatically if they meet certain conditions. I will explain about smart contract later, so think of smart contract as the system that you decide the conditions to make transactions in advance, and it is executed when it is satisfied. And if process automation becomes possible, real estate transactions can be made anytime. Then the blockchain has a feature that you should remember that it is non-centralized and has high transparency by each node monitoring transactions. Non-centralized means no mediator, so no commission will be taken. As I mentioned earlier, since many experts are involved in real estate transactions, the fee will be high. In other words, the introduction of the blockchain has a great effect in reducing the user's economic burden. Moreover, due to the high transparency, when a person buys real estate, you can instantly know with the device such as smartphone how owner has changed so far. Of course, even if you inquire to relevant ministries now, you can know the change of owner, but time and labor will increase. And in some countries, our data about real estate is not completely preserved. So, the introduction of blockchain in such countries will greatly contribute to improving the transparency of real estate transactions. There are countless fields where there is a possibility that blockchain can be applied, and here I will take up election as a second example. Basically, like real estate transaction, I focus on high transparency and no fraud, even if the central administrator is absent. If it is decided to record in blockchain when someone board, laws such as double voting cannot be done without setting up a central administrator. That is to say, a polling place is unnecessary. And a polling station being unnecessary means that we can vote with smartphone anytime, anywhere. So, the voting rate will be improved. If you can vote on smartphone in an environment where frauds cannot be done, you can prevent manipulation of election results, as it is impossible to buy over the person in charge at the polling place or commit fraud while counting votes. Then, because transactions in blockchain are always visible from outside, you can see the number of votes of each candidate in real time. So, you can greatly reduce the time taken for the voting process. And being able to do fair election without fearing the person in charge for the polling place means reduction of various costs related to the election. In this lesson, I focus on real estate transaction and election, which have been considered as the area where application blockchain is expected. And in addition to it, introduction into more various fields can be considered. Bear the feature in mind that, regardless of the absence of the central administrator who guarantees the value of the blockchain, the fraud is completely prevented and the value is expressed. And think about it that you can apply to something.